Goedenavond allemaal, de 5e aflevering ondertussen al. Vanavond trekken we naar Ierland. Ik ben er zeer blij mee, want 2 weken geleden zou ik normaal gezien richting Dublin vertrekken. Helaas is daar een of ander virusje tussen gekomen. Dus ik kijk er enorm hard naar uit om zo dadelijk onze gast te ontvangen. In dit geval gaat dat Chris Teeling zijn. Of Chris Hayes, excuseer, van Teeling. Chris is op een top bezeten door whisky, barman, achtergrond. En hij kent zijn product buitengewoon goed. Dus bij deze, welkom Chris.
How are you doing, Gunther?
Hi Chris. How did you like the intro?
What's that?
Did you hear the intro?
I did, yeah. Do you know something? I was getting nervous. I feel like I'm on a real chat show, and it said I'm backstage in the comments, and I felt like I was going on to. What was the music you put on?
It was something I thought you would like, because earlier on we had a little talk, and you sent me a picture this morning. You remember now? It was something about hoodie. So yeah. We did it gangster style. So that's why I used 2-pack. Your first fan.
I did the hoodie for a little bit more comfort. So I still have I don't know if you can see or not.
Okay. You do know we record this, so yes. People can still talk to us. Even your colleagues.
Even Darren.
Especially Darren.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Chris, how are you doing?
Good. Yeah, not too bad. At the moment, obviously, I am here in Dublin, in my home. Similar to yourselves, we have the same restrictions. So working at home and keeping busy. How about yourself? How are you getting on?
Quite busy, actually. 2 jobs. Completely different jobs, but both of them are busy, so I don't complain about anything. I see the first
Benny coming through. How are you?
Yeah, Benny is here. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. Only 2 minutes in, and we've the 2 biggest Teeling fans on.
Yeah, of course you are. You did a few shows earlier on, some cocktail making.
Yeah, so we at the moment are doing a couple of online platforms working with Dublin charities. So we've got our Teeling Thursdays, which basically runs every Thursday, focusing more so, I suppose, on the cocktail side. So looking at home cocktails, and then we've incorporated some other fun things. Like I was doing some baking. We'll have a couple of pairings, things like that going forward. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's definitely been fun getting more into the digital space and seeing how that operates for an independent company has always been good fun.
It's completely different though.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of completely new challenges, and a lot of it has been a very good learning experience. But no, I've do you know something? I've loved it so far. It's been very enjoyable. Okay. And obviously we've done some virtual tastings, and there'll be product launches now coming soon on things specifically for Belgium.
Yeah, you talked about it earlier. There are a few nice ones coming up. I presume you can't say anything about them already?
No, yeah. So the ones that we'll have, I suppose, coming in the near future, the one that I'm probably most looking forward to, we're going to be producing, or I should say releasing some peated single malts, which I am super, super excited for. So bear in mind, the history between Ireland and peat is kind of less recognized than it is in Scotland. I think when people talk about Irish whiskey, they kind of jump towards non-peated, whereas there's some great examples, even, more modern whiskey brands like Dunville, Ecklenville up in the north in Belfast, who are looking at some peated stuff. You've got Kirk, which is a new Irish whiskey. They're looking at some seaweed, so smoking seaweed as a different form of peat. Even West Cork, I can see you've got a couple of other stuff on the back.
Yeah. But they are not really peated.
Yeah, so you wouldn't have that typical peated grain. With ourselves now, it is going to be a low ppm. So we'll be talking somewhere around 10, 15, give or take. And
Okay.
the barrels TBC, to be confirmed.
Okay.
But apart from that, yeah, there's a couple of other ones. So obviously the Renaissance just out. I know it's pretty much already gone in Belgium. It's
Yep.
done so well. We will have our follow up to our Brabazon 3, or Brabazon 2. There'll be Brabazon 3 now in the near future. As always, there's a ton of stuff coming out of Teeling.
Okay. You were talking about the peated version. At this moment, there's only one real peated Irish whiskey, I think. It's Connemara, if I'm right.
So I think Connemara kind of lays claim to being one of the only, 100% peated Irish single malts. You've got example of blends, or as you said, like West Cork, who are using some peat bog,
yeah,
or peated cask, as you say. So it should be an interesting, I suppose, historical landmark for a Dublin distillery as well. Like particularly as well, jumping back in history, a lot of illegal Irish whiskey would have been peated. If you think about it from an economic point of view, peat or turf would have been much more easily accessible in certain areas of Ireland, and it would have been cheaper. So you kind of have the breakdown between Parliament whiskey and then poitín. And poitín, a lot of it would have been peated. So it's going to be interesting. I'm as much a fan of peated whiskey as I am of non-peated whiskey. So as I said, I'm seriously looking forward to it.
Okay. One thing for our viewers, if you have any questions, you can ask them. Just comment, and we will answer them. Chris will do the answering part.
Yes.
Chris, you were
Dutch and in English.
We talked about Connemara. Sorry about my pronunciation. It has been a long day. And then we come to Cooley. Cooley is actually on a history point a part of Teeling. It's one of the most important people in Irish history, I think. It's John Teeling.
Yeah, just a great photo of him. No, absolutely. I think with John, his part in the Irish whiskey industry is so integral. At the time during the 1980s, obviously within the space of 100 years, the Irish whiskey market had completely collapsed in on itself. Went from nearly 70% of global whiskey sales to 2%, so it was nearly nothing. Not only that, you had a lot of distilleries who were shutting down, so went from the guts of around 200, 300 during the 18th century, 37 in Dublin in total, to only 3 distilleries during the 1970s. So of course would have been Middleton, Bushmills, and Powers. Powers was the last fully functional distillery in Dublin. So where John kind of really comes into play, and I have so much time for John because he's just such a lovely man, and really a fantastic businessman, and has a great whiskey head about him. But he set up Cooley in 1987. Essentially, he did his doctorate on the Irish whiskey revival. Supposedly, as well, ironically, is a teetotaler, and completely revolutionized the Irish whiskey industry. But he saw an opening during the 80s. He did his doctorate on the Irish whiskey revival, and he bought an old ethanol plant essentially on the border of Northern Ireland and Ireland. Probably, as he'll admit himself, one of the least picturesque distilleries.
It's an ugly distillery.
Yeah, it's a sore thing to see, but in terms of the whiskies it was producing, was out of this world. Of course, producing peated and non-peated whiskies, so the likes, as you mentioned, of Connemara was produced there, originally using some Irish peat. You then also have Tyrconnell, which were using like Madeira, sherry, port barrels, and bottling at 43% ABV. So a little bit more forward thinking than some other Irish whiskey at the time, which was bottled mostly at 40%, would have been filtered and would have been matured in maybe bourbon or ex-sherry casks. Of course, that also included Kilbeggan. So he revamped the Kilbeggan brand, one of the oldest Irish whiskey distilleries, one of the first licensed Irish distilleries, dates back as far as the 17th century. He reopened that in 2007. So you've got a ton of prestigious, really, I suppose, historical Irish whiskey brands and some great juice. And that sold off then in 2011 to Beam, so Jim Beam, who were essentially having a merger with Suntory. And the two sons of John, Jack and Stephen Teeling, they essentially were working as a family collectively at the time. There they are there. So Jack, he became the CEO of Cooley in 2010, literally a year before they sold off. And he'll admit himself that he had some absolutely fantastic Irish whiskey brands, which were really historically driven. Hello, Don, how are you keeping? He admitted himself that it was a little bit difficult to sell those brands, to a modern audience who were looking for something a little bit different, who were looking for whiskey which was led from a liquid-led approach. And he just found this kind of disconnect between what people were consuming in other countries, or how the market was going, versus the portfolio that they had. And what they decided to do when they sold off the Cooley distillery to Beam in 2011 is they kept about 16,000 barrels of that stock to set up their own, continue obviously independent distilling. So Cooley at the time was the only independent Irish distillery. Middleton, of course, was owned by Pernod Ricard. Yeah, so you've been up there, haven't you?
I have been there. I have been lucky.
Absolutely. A little bit. I also explain it to people that it's a little bit like IKEA, but for whiskey drinkers. You got every single grade and every single flavor that you can imagine.
Yeah, and you can try a lot of them.
Yeah. I think originally they were maybe a little bit tentative to people coming in and viewing what we do and giving out samples. But I think when you guys are up there, it was nearly like the size of shotgun shells in the barrels of the drills.
It's like whiskey Valhalla.
Yeah, it is actually a little bit. So that's up in the old in the vicinity of the old distilleries up in Greenore in County Louth, about 50 kilometers from Teeling distillery. And of course, we kept those 16,000 barrels set up the distillery you can see here behind me in 2015. So that's when our distillery was ready to go. And of course, the head of innovation at the time, Alex Chasko, our master distiller, he was head of innovations at Cooley. So there is that kind of family tie, that historical tie between the whiskies that were produced there and the whiskey we're producing now, to a certain extent.
Completely different. You can't say it's Cooley too.
No, absolutely. It's night and day. And I suppose those 16,000 barrels that we received, Alex's job was really to hand select, firstly, the highest quality, what we were going to use for, cask aging, cask finishing, as well as then, what were going to be our core products, what we were going to release from a commercial perspective. I'm just seeing something coming in from Benny.
The first question is in about the Brabazon 3, when it's coming out.
Oh, the release date. So I'd say realistically, we'll be looking just at the moment with these very strange and unusual times. I'd say you'd be probably looking closer to the end of summer. But I think the good news for anybody watching, particularly from Belgium, is that, as you know, you kind of get first servings and it tends to go quite quickly over to you guys. But yeah, I'd say you'd be probably looking roughly around the end of summer, give or take.
More or less September, I think.
Yeah. And of course, if it does come before then, we'll absolutely be doing a product launch in Belgium as well.
Okay. I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, same. Me too.
Another question. Will there be any cask strength or higher ABV releases among the peated ones?
So specifically cask strength peated whiskies, I'd say for the moment they'll probably hold off just in terms of a stock management perspective. Like bear in mind, for a lot of our whiskey, we're basing off smaller quantities. For any of our distillery exclusives, for any of our single casks, usually we're talking somewhere within the realm of 300 to 500 bottles. So I'd say most likely there won't be many peated single casks, but in terms of non-peated single casks, at the moment we have some pot still in some virgin American oak, which is a single cask that we have now in our distillery. That's obviously available when we're back and open to the public.
And they will be at higher ABV.
Which one's that now?
The pot stills you were talking about.
So yes. So what we are working on at the moment is we have one of the three components of our single pot still. Of course, it was matured in bourbon casks, sherry casks, and some virgin American oak. And we've highlighted kind of one of those components as a single cask. So bottled, don't quote me on this, but I think it is somewhere around 59% ABV. Drinks like it's, around 47, 48. Very, very easygoing, delicious whiskey. Really is.
Talking about the pot still brings us to another question. The pot still, it's not the best photo I see, but it's one of the most important whiskies for Teeling distillery, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, I suppose in terms of our history, the brand was set up in 2012 and the distillery finished in 2015. These are kind of landmarks that we overlook, I think, at this stage, but they were very important for not only Irish whiskey, but for Dublin history. Like Teeling, of course, was the first new distillery in Dublin in 125 years. Obviously, someone coming from Dublin, that's a massive feat for anyone from the capital. Likewise, for the single pot still, that was the first whiskey distilled in Dublin in nearly 50 years. As I mentioned, we're not as much a historical brand, but I think sometimes we kind of overlook or don't appreciate the importance of these fantastic landmarks. And of course, last year, the 24-year-old, I think none of us really could have anticipated winning best single malt in the world. First time an Irish distillery has ever won that award. So that's kind of our proverbial mic drop now, so to speak.
It was a surprise. It was really good. But another question, Don Dimi. You also send samples for tasting competitions, and if so, which ones?
It's a great question, Dom. So at the moment, we are looking at branching out for our virtual tastings. We are working at the moment with Celtic whiskey in Ireland. So we are essentially doing Trinity Discovery packs. So for the Trinity range, of course, is the Teeling small batch, single grain, and single malt, where we are granting access to private masterclasses for people purchasing any sample bottles. And that's something that we're looking to expand upon and kind of evolve for our European markets in particular.
Okay.
Because I'm a juror member. Oh, nice. Okay, so you mean more so from a judging perspective?
Yeah, I think.
To be honest, I think that's something that absolutely is possible. What I will say, if anybody wants to reach out to me personally, after the tasting, I'll more than happily talk things like sample bottles.
Only about whiskey.
Yes.
Sorry, Anne. Anne is a big fan, as you know. Another question, Gert. There's a very nice standard single grain. It's true. Are there plans or stock to bottle an older single grain Teeling as well?
Do you know something, Gert? It's something that I personally have been hoping for a lot. So the single grain, of course, that you're referring to, I'm sure that many people know it. But if you're not familiar, the Teeling's single grain, the age statement, we're looking at roughly somewhere around 6 years old. The reason I say roughly is, of course, we're working off a batch process where from year to year, the wine cask we receive, the time it spends is going to vary up, more focused on the quality as opposed to, I suppose, a mathematical approach of exactly 6 years. And that was Cabernet Sauvignon, worked incredibly well with a corn-based distillate. Probably one of my favorites, actually, of the core range. In terms of doing further releases for the single grain, at the moment, there's been nothing that's been confirmed. I've seen, for example, that Kilbeggan, obviously as a separate brand under Beam Suntory, have released some higher age statements, like there's, is it 17 or 19, which was absolutely stunning. So I think definitely there is room for that in the future. And in saying that, considering that innovation is kind of all what we're about, I think there's definitely a possibility to release some either older age statements for grain whiskey in particular, or even some different variations, like different cask types, different mash bills.
Okay, there's an invitation for you. You can always send samples to our competition.
Great, fantastic. What's it? Someone said to me, never turn down someone offering to send you whiskey or someone offering to taste your whiskey. I think is the advice I've given.
Both of them are correct. Your distillery, a friend of mine made some pictures. It's Gunther Musse.
Great photos.
A famous photographer in our area. So, but if one thing is known, or not everybody knows it, the pot stills, they are named after the children of Stephen, I think.
Jack, yeah. Jack. So they're named, So Alison, Natalie, and Rebecca are the three daughters of Jack Teeling. Funny enough, actually, what I only found out recently is that originally comes down to tax purposes in Ireland. So, of course, the Irish, we had many ways of trying to avoid taxes and do things on our own way when obviously the English invaded Ireland and there was more legislation, more changes in taxes. Pot still as a category, of course, is a great example of that. Of course, the malt tax of the 18th century, every time distillers used malted barley, they of course had to pay a certain amount of tax, and the Irish created this style to avoid tax to a certain extent. Kind of became popularized mostly in Dublin as kind of the quintessential style. But the name of pot stills originally came back to when people were going around, taxmen, you essentially were recognized by the pot stills that you had. So they go around, let's say, with a physical list and go, okay, there's Alison, tick, she's producing this amount of quantity, okay, there's Rebecca, tick, and that's how they're recognized for tax purposes. Okay. Whereas nowadays, I think it's a nice touch. It really embodies what we're all about. Of course, we're a family-owned brand, we're independent, we're a craft distillery. You do very much get that feel when you come to us and you visit the distillery. And then they had a problem. Yeah. Oh, the casks. I forgot about this. Yeah. So when we first set up the distillery, we kind of had everything thought through as to, of course, you've been to the distillery, so well, Gunther, that everything in the distillery is built from an innovation point of view in terms of what type of washbacks we're using, the shape of the stills, like they're handcrafted coming from Italy. What type of mill we're using. We're using a wet mill versus a dry mill. Simple things like that are obviously going to affect the liquid that we produce. And then once you get down to the warehouse, you've got nearly 80 different cask types from any flavor you can think of under the sun. But the second reason the distillery obviously was built was to bring this experience alive, to have a brand home where we could have 100,000 visitors come through our doors every year and still have a fully functional distillery. So the distills were named after Jack's daughters. I think the challenge that we faced when Stephen's wife had two baby girls, Zoe and Holly, absolutely gorgeous, most adorable two kids you'll ever see. We kind of had to be a little bit inventive. So we talked about things like naming them after, washbacks. Obviously, if you're a young girl and your sisters are named after, these gorgeous handcrafted copper pot stills, and you get the short straw and get named after fermenters, I don't think it's going to go down too well. So what we've done is we've laid down some of our first liquid that we ever produced in our distillery. We've laid down casks for both Holly and Zoe, and when they turn 18, they will receive those barrels of whiskey. So then, fingers crossed they like whiskey when they turn 18.
And then you have the first batch, the Teeling pot still number 1. Yeah,
so I suppose to give you a little bit of a background on this, we did a patent process where you might notice in Belgium that if you look closely on your bottle, now this is the newest one, so there's no more at the very bottom, somewhere around here, it'll usually say B1, B2, B3. Particularly the second and the third batch made their way over to Belgium, and you will notice a difference in taste and a difference in aroma.
There wasn't any batch 1 in Belgium, so I had to.
So batch 1 was pretty much an Irish exclusive. Obviously, being the first whiskey distilled in Dublin, you know, it made sense to celebrate that for anybody in the local market. And then batch 2, batch 3, we exported globally. But you really will notice a difference in those batches. Because the barrels are different. We started off with nearly 30 different cask types and different styles of wood. So everything from, you know, Portuguese oak, chestnut, American and French white oak. We then sort of pared that recipe down, kind of reworked it, had an open discussion with pot still enthusiasts, and kind of sat in a recipe that we were happy on. So I suppose the barrel types and the mash bill we're using at the moment, 50% malt, 50% unmalted barley. That's very much going to stay the recipe for this particular whiskey.
At this moment, it's the unbatched.
How old is the unbatched?
Yeah.
So you'd be looking just above 4 years old. So again, you know, it is unapologetically a 4-year-old whiskey. We're not hello Patrick, how are you? We're not pretending that it's an older whiskey. Is all old stock from Cooley, or is there stock from Bushmills or any other as well? I see you're obviously very familiar with the family history. So the thing is, the reason I'll probably tiptoe around this question a little bit in the sense is that when we received 16,000 barrels, it was very hard from our perspective to distinguish whether the liquid was coming from one side or the other. So perfectly honest answer, you know, I couldn't tell you 100% the exact origin of some of those older age statements. And I think that's the interesting thing, coming back to the pot still, is that obviously, you know, we can say exactly the yeast strain that was used, exactly the cuts that were done, what the climate was like in the maturation space, what the mash bill is, what's the barrels, and we've more, I suppose, more of a, not an ownership, but more of an understanding, shall we say, from my perspective anyway, of where the liquid is coming from. So with ours, they're done. I'm sure Gunther can show you the image of the warehouse. You'll see them now. They're literally stacked one on top of each other. So there we've got 20,000 barrels. Cask types that we're using in Ireland. The great thing is that we're not restricted to using just oak like it is in Scotland. So that gives a ton of room for innovation. We can use anything from chestnut, acacia, cherry woods. You can use amburana, which is a Brazilian hardwoods. This really does obviously affect flavor. And from a cost perspective, maybe not as efficient. Like chestnut, for example, you'll lose about 15% to evaporation. Versus in Ireland, the standard American, Quercus alba, American white oak, or Crocus robur, French oak, you'll lose about 5%. But from a taste, entirely different. Very, very interesting. And the smallest barrels we'll have up in the warehouses will be 25 litre. There's some virgin Hungarian oak. The largest ones we'd have now would be some PX brandy chestnut barrels, which are these massive 700 litre casks, which we used for a distillery exclusive.
Okay, there are a lot of casks in the warehouse. So
yeah. So our main cask types we'll be using will be everything from rum to wine casks, obviously for the core range. Like the small batch, obviously, is in Central American rum casks.
Yeah.
Single malt of the core range is in 5 different wine casks. So white wine Burgundy, Cabernet Sauvignon, Madeira, Port, and Oloroso Sherry. Outside of those, then some of our more experimental ones we're using will be anything from ex tequila, ex eau de vie, ex schnapps, ginger beer, vermouth, cachaça. We've got some beer casks, we've got some gin casks. Really, genuinely, anything you can think of. We really are trying to.
A lot of them are coming out soon.
Yes, the gin one actually already is on the Belgian market. So that was a collaboration
with
we did with Kinrooi. Yeah. I'm sure you've tried it. It was really interesting actually when we first put that into casks. It was really heavy on like pine and car seeds or juniper. And then after an additional 6 months, that just completely transformed, really mellowed out, really balanced out, and was stunning. Was really super. But when we first put it in, the kind of balance of the liquid was completely out of kilter, which was really interesting, and just shows, you really can't base it off either A, age, or B, the quantity of liquid you're going to be producing. I know, obviously yield is an important factor for distilleries, but it really is constantly monitoring through taste. I'm just seeing
As another
25-liter more used for experimenting or testing. So in general, they'll be used mostly for cask finishing. For example, obviously in a smaller cask, they're used a lot by home distillers because you're going to get more traction. It's going to be much quicker for the maturation process. So that's to say, if you were to leave, let's say, a single malt in some 25-liter American bourbon casks or 25, oak casks, the extraction is going to be so rapid that if you left that for 2 or 3 years, it's just going to taste like wood. It's going to be way too heavy on tannins. So usually you'll use them as a more finishing than, I suppose, a full maturation. So shall we say? Of course, in Ireland, our legal limit is 3 years before you release a whiskey. So if you do the maths, Teeling's first release in 2018, 2019 was a 3-year-old pot still, was our first release. And then coming back to your question on the batch 1, so we actually did a commercial release in ex-Muscat barrels. We essentially donated all the proceeds back to charity. We did roughly about 150 bottles and auctioned them off on Whiskey Auctioneer. And believe it or not, broke the world record for the most expensive new whiskey from new distillery. That's not a brag on our behalf. That's very much shows the interest in the Irish whiskey category at the moment. If
I did a few bits.
Irish whiskey is selling like that.
Yeah, I did a few bits, but I stopped very soon.
Yeah. But no, of course, the market, the way it's going at the moment is very, very exciting. For any of you who are watching who are Irish whiskey fans, we're very much hitting the tip of the iceberg for Teeling. But in terms of the overall market, there's now 31 fully functional distilleries in different levels of production, of course. But there's going to be a lot more additions to the category. People looking at the terroir element, like the Waterford distillery. People like ourselves who at the moment are looking about cask finishing, but then also focusing more on specialty malts. You've got a ton of fantastic additions to the category.
But only in Dublin. For example, a few years ago, there was none distillery. Then you came, Teeling came. Soon after that, Pierce Lyons.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was the Whiskey Museum, with which... not making whiskey, but they were there, whiskey enthusiast. Then Baumer,
promoting the story.
Jameson, and then afterwards it was I think, I don't know who was first, Roux & Co. or I forgot about the name.
Dublin Liberties.
Dublin Liberties.
Yeah, so absolutely. When we started off, so we were the first distillery in Dublin in 125 years. At the moment, there's now 4 fully operational distilleries. Funnily enough, literally at the back of that distillery, as you know, is where the Dublin Liberties is. They're literally behind us on the other side of the wall. So for any of you who are coming to Dublin, and I would highly, highly recommend, when this is all over, go to your bars, go to restaurants, support local businesses. And of course, if you get a chance, I'd love to welcome you here in our distillery. But you can really now do the equivalent of like a Dublin whiskey trail, which is quite cool. Roux & Co., of course, are owned by Diageo. They're built in the old Guinness powerhouse. Brilliant distillery, highly worth going to. Likewise, Pierce Lyons, as you know, is in the old James Cathedral, which is super cool. Having these pot stills in the middle of a cathedral and stained glass windows with all the story, which is incredible. And then of course, the Dublin Liberties, it's in an old tannery. So you've got these small kind of history nods in each of the areas. Teeling's originally based in Marrowbone Lane, would have been a big marketplace, which was built up by a big Dublin family called the Brabazon family. Originally, one of the earls was William Brabazon. Hence the series that we've done, the Brabazon series. And of course, our distillery would be quite modern, as you can see from the building itself. That, of course, goes into who we are, what we're about. We are a modern whiskey brand as a whole.
Teeling is always talking about revival. Is that the reason for the Phoenix?
Yeah, so we originally started off with a logo which was TWC, and this kind of came a little bit later on. So the Phoenix, of course, being, you know, symbol of rebirth, renewal, renaissance, it kind of captures two things. The first is obviously the resilience of the Irish whiskey category. So how, you know, at one point in history, we really dominated the global whiskey industry, kind of then collapsing and then coming up again. It does also kind of embody that idea of creating something new and different. And of course, attached to the pot still, or attached to the Phoenix, is a small pot still, which I think was a really nice touch. So that kind of embodies that juxtaposition between the old and the new. Like we often say, we like to be informed by, or we like to take learnings from history, be that, you know, past whiskies or past brands, but very much try and take that in a new direction.
Okay, you tried most of them, I presume, of the whiskeys.
Yes.
I mean,
perks of the job.
Yeah. Oh, too bad. Which are the ones you like the most? Of which would you like to have in your closet?
That's a very, very tough question. So, I suppose if I had to say my top three,
money doesn't.
Some of the ones we've done. Now, this is throughout the years. I've really enjoyed the Revival series. You know, I know when that was done and dusted and was replaced by the Renaissance, I think there were some absolutely stunning drams that we produced. Of course, I've been with Teeling now nearly since the start. I've been with them for 3 years. And the Revival 2, which was matured in bourbon and then finished in Calvados barrels, was absolutely delicious.
I like it.
Very soft style, a little bit of a grassiness to it, or kind of a herbaceous quality, which is really nice. I'd say that would be definitely my top three. 24, I think, has to be in there. The original, of course, was the 21-year-old. So I remember, you know, when I first went to Belgium, one of my first market visits would have included some of the old 21-year-old and the older editions of the 24. And I remember getting the question constantly, how are you a brand that exists since 2015 and have 21-year-old whiskies? That was always interesting to discuss, the family tie between John and the current generation, Jack and Stephen. But the 21-year-old started as obviously peated Sauternes and bourbon casks. It was only 10% peated, so the rest is, of course, distiller's malt, 90% regular malt, 10% distiller peated malt, and that became the 24-year-old. And that kind of leads on to one of our upcoming innovations. We're going to have a 28-year-old, which is essentially the 24 left 4 years longer in Sauternes. So that is something very much to look forward to as well. I've tried it there not too long ago from casks in the warehouse, and it's very interesting. You've kind of less of that peat smoke, more of the kind of nectarines, more of the kind of peach flavors or ripe fruits that tend to come out a little bit more from the Sauternes. I'd say third, I'm gonna have to lean with the pot still. Just being a pot still enthusiast and being, you know, a dub. I think having the first whiskey in Dublin is something that is just very, very cool. And from a taste perspective, it's a very, very good dram.
Yeah.
Something as well I'm looking forward to seeing it as well as it progresses, you know, as a 12-year-old, as a 16-year-old, as a 20-year-old, and we can look back on this and do that comparison.
Okay. Is that an invite? No?
What was that?
I asked you, is that an invite? Are you inviting me?
Where?
Tasting them in a few years.
Oh, yes. Oh, for sure. Sure. My plan is to keep every edition. And then when I'm coming over to Belgium, we'll wait until it gets a little bit older. And I'm starting to show lines and grey hair on my head, and I'll bring them over, the different expressions.
You bring the whiskey and I bring the beer.
Yeah, exactly.
Fair deal, fair deal. I'm watching these. I was lucky enough to be at your distillery last year, and we did a Belgium tour tasting, a Merlot cask.
Super whiskey. Yeah, it really is.
I was a big fan myself.
So I suppose this is actually a good example. I don't know why that reminded me with whoever was asking about the grain whiskies. One thing I think that could open up as well is we've started obviously to experiment with more wine casks, with Merlot, with Lupiac, with Sauternes, with whatever. And I think that could also be an interesting route to go down. Is looking more at different wine. Different wines all around the world. But the Merlot cask, so that was obviously single cask. Very, very, very good whiskey. And I think, was that Mulligan's I saw in the photo?
It was Mulligan's.
Yeah.
One of the best bars in Dublin. Whiskey bars.
For sure. Yeah. No, it really is.
Chris, we have come to the end of the show. So thank you very much. I was really happy to talk to you. It felt a bit like coming to Dublin. And there's another question. I know.
Chasing
the Merlot finish isn't the finish. It's a single cask bottling. It's bottled by the Belgian Whiskey Tour. It was 5 shops who were bringing them out. So it was not completely Teeling. How you say it? We bought it from Teeling. Is it correct?
Yeah, it was I suppose a special bottling done for you guys.
So
and in terms of its taste profile, I meant to say for anybody who does have that bottle at home, the biggest notes that you're looking from that, for me anyway, personally, is those really kind of heavy jammy notes, or kind of stone fruits. Like I kind of joke with people and say it's so jammy you could almost spread it on a bit of toast. It does have those really kind of fresh fruit notes and such a lovely dry finish. Out of all the single casks actually we've done, it's probably up there. I'd say definitely top 3 as well.
Okay,
and we've done a lot, as you know.
Talking about doing a lot, I forgot to mention it. You do a lot of charity work. Teeling does a lot of charity work. For example, a week ago, you did this one. I don't know. The light is not that good. Okay, there he is. The Frontline Heroes cause. I know you do a lot of charity work with businesses in the area of the liberties, or working together with jobs. Is that how we're gonna say it? Is that marketing, or is it more?
No. Yeah, no, I think it was, so when we set up as a brand in 2015, let's not forget, in the current market, so post-recession, we just needed a lot of support when we set up, and we got a ton of positive feedback, a ton of kind of give back from the local areas. So now that we've established ourselves, as a brand, like even if you look at the growth of the brand, when we set up, we were available in 27 markets, give or take, or in the 20s. We're now available in 65 markets all around the world. I think we're much more in a position to start actively kind of engaging as much as we can with the local area. And we kind of took it, I suppose, upon ourselves as much as we could at the moment, during these difficult times to support local charities. So like we've been working with James's Hospital, the Beaumont Hospital, with Tala Hospital, with the Lone Ireland. Really genuinely, trying to give back in any way we can. So the Frontline Heroes, that was it was essentially a distillery exclusive. We did only 300 bottles, and 100% of those proceeds went back to charity. So there was nothing market related. As you know, Teeling are less of a market led brand, and we're more of a, I suppose, a liquid led brand. But with that one, it's in Irish Hungarian oak. And I suppose, while I'm live here, it does go without saying that, anybody who is watching from the hospitality industry, from the bar industry, any essential workers or anybody that I just want to personally extend my thanks to everything that you're doing here in Ireland over the past 5 weeks. I know I wouldn't be able to get through this situation without you. Seriously appreciate it. And, it goes without saying, anybody who wants a bit of a laugh, he wants to learn more about whiskey, always feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be more than happy to do private tastings or talk about cocktails or anything spirits related.
Okay, apple of my eye, 2, please.
Yes, I have been thinking about that, of extending it a little bit more. There is one that reminds me, there is obviously the Teeling Thursdays going live now, it used to be tomorrow. So that is going to be on a coffee-based cocktail, and it's not the Irish coffee. So I'll be interested to see what you think of that.
Okay, we have a question from David, and it's a rather nice question. What Finnish bottling would you like to see from Teeling in the near future?
Oh, nice. Yeah. So there's one in particular that I'm really looking forward to now. Well, two. One that is a possibility because we're using it at the moment in our warehouse, and another that I think has just become available with the way that the laws are changing globally. So the first one is the cachaça. Cachaça, of course, is a Brazilian style spirit produced from fermented sugarcane juice. Tastes like liquid carrot cake. The whiskey that's been matured in Amburana casks, so Brazilian hardwood. That's one I'm really, if the possibility came around that we were able to release that, it's something I would love to see. Even possibly as a whiskey liqueur, dropping that ABV down. Of course, we're 46% is kind of our DNA, where we get a lot more mouthfeel, where you're adding to the aroma and flavor. But even as a whiskey liqueur could be interesting. The second one, then, I would love to see more Irish whiskey matured in mezcal or tequila. There's one or two already on the market, but I think it could be incredibly interesting having those really fresh fruit flavors that you associate with an Irish single malt, and then taking on that kind of I wouldn't say it's a similar smokiness to what you get from peat, but that kind of char smoke that you'll get from, say, a good mezcal.
Okay, me myself, I'm looking forward to the pot still about 10 years old.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So, Chris, this is the end of our broadcast. Thank you very much for being here, bringing a little bit of Dublin, like Benny and David said, to Belgium. I hope to see you in a few months. If all goes well, I will be there at the end of October, if all goes well. But I'm pretty sure we'll talk before that time.
Yes. Thank you so much, Gunter. It was an absolute pleasure, and I will talk to you again soon. Anybody watching from Belgium, I hope to see you guys in person in Belgium or in Ireland in the near future. So look after yourself.
Oké, bye Chris.
Cheers.
Zo, dat was de aflevering van vanavond. Dank jullie wel. Het was een leuke aflevering. Ik heb er enorm van genoten. Ik hoop jullie ook. Het was toch een beetje terug naar Dublin gaan. Dus fijne avond nog. En tot zaterdag. Dan ontmoeten we onze lieftallige Claire. Komt nog eens terug. Ze is vorige week hier geweest. Maar deze week komt ze met de Tummentaal. So, join ons dus zeker om 8 uur. En tot die tijd, het beste. Adieu. En tot zaterdag.